Passing days just like buttons. This one time, this friend of mine. No way that was me. No way that was me. They are there open for no one. Its talent's alright in me. Didn't even see it coming. For all it's just a lie, but for all it's just a lie, but if you think this is your story, just cause you got in the way, doesn't mean it's your story. You just got in the way. You just got in the way. It's that actor, you know the one. He made that movie you all know so well. It's that actor, you know the one. He made that movie you all know so well. So well. So well. Alright.
We have talked about some scaffold safety basics, some of the regulations, some of the best practices that apply to scaffold usage. What I want to do in this video is look at a bunch of pictures and talk about the problems with the scaffolds that we see in the pictures. This is some of what we do as safety professionals when we're out on the factory floor or on a construction site or in an oil refinery, wherever we might be. We're looking for deficiencies. We're looking for hazards. Not, again, man, I really hate saying we're looking for hazards, because it's more than hazards that we're looking for when we're doing our audits, our inspections. I always like to call my inspections visits, because I'm out there visiting with the workers, talking to the workers. I'm not out there as a cop, trying to make them feel bad or trying to get them in trouble. I'm there to help them. And one of the ways I help them is by pointing out deficiencies that could cause an injury. So let's just go ahead and get started. I think I've got about 22 different slides, and on most of the slides there are pictures with deficiencies related to scaffold usage. This is an older picture. This is probably from the 70s or 80s, but this is a common deficiency that you see often when scaffolds are in use. They have their scaffold set up, but it's not quite high enough. So what do? They put something on top of the scaffold that allows them to reach a little higher. You can't do that. Even if this was a proper work platform and not a sawhorse, it is illegal to do this. To increase the working height of your scaffold by putting a ladder or an additional work platform or a sawhorse on top of it. Fall protection is also an issue. They have no guardrail up. Forget fall protection. These guys, again, these are the old school construction workers that laugh at you if you talk to them about fall protection. Back in their day, they probably didn't know what a harness and lanyard was, because this is an older picture from an era when many construction companies especially did not use any fall protection. Now this is a more up-to-date picture, and this isn't an egregious problem. It's not quite as serious as what we saw in the previous problem, but that bucket is not rated as a work platform. I'll be honest, I've stood on 5-gallon buckets myself at home, but I should not do this when I'm being paid by an employer, because if I fall off of this, it's not on me. it's on the employer. Or if that bucket collapses, it's going to cost the employer. Employers that are serious about safety, they're going to provide their workers with an appropriate work platform like this. This is the type of work platform that this drywall finisher should be using. There's a lot going on here in this picture. We've got a close-up of a section of tube and coupler scaffolding. It's missing connectors. There are connectors missing. The components are corroded. The paint's worn off. There's rust. Not a good look for the company, and rusty steel may not have the capacity to support the loads that are placed on it. Inadequate decking. The decking planks themselves are not sufficient for what's required. This is not proper scaffold grade material with the cracks and the checking going on. We've also got too much of a gap between the planks. You're allowed up to a 1-inch gap, but this gap here, if we measured it, that's going to measure out to more than 1 inch. Also, they have concrete blocks on top of the work platform to increase the working height. Concrete blocks are not rated to support any structural loads, and we'll talk more about that in another picture. But this really goes back to what I really wanted to hit on here, was the idea that you can't put anything on top of a scaffold platform to increase the working height. Certainly not this. That would not be safe. To me, that defies common sense, especially this block right here that's just part of a block. That's barely as wide as the plank that's on top of it. Now, there's one other thing that I should mention with this picture. Again, we don't see it in this picture, but a lot of times when you see setups like this, they're not actually standing on top of this. They're using this to stage their materials. If it's a bricklaying operation, which it is, they may just be using this for their bricks. But if they're putting bricks up here, then they run into a possible issue with overloading the scaffolding. We also have cantilever issues, going back to the issue of cantilever. That cantilever should be between 6 and 18 inches, depending on how wide the platform is. It can be between 6 and 18 inches. So it could be good, but that's something that an OSHA inspector, they're going to look at the cantilever, they're going to look at the gap, they're going to look at this additional structure on top of the platform and think, well, is somebody standing on top of that? OSHA's not my greatest concern, but they are a concern. First of all, we want safe job sites, but we also need to be compliant with the regulations that are out there. This has a multiple red marks against it. If we were grading this, there would be a lot of red ink like I have on the slide already. Oh boy, a lot of problems. A lot of problems. If we were in class, I wouldn't be telling you. I'd be asking you, what are the problems here? And if you think about it from a common sense standpoint, what could hurt somebody? Forget about the OSHA regs for a second. What in this picture doesn't look right, doesn't feel right? Well, we have workers up here on inadequate decking, an inadequate work platform. It's not fully decked all the way across. We have a potential overloading of the platform with the brick stacked up on top of it. It's out of level, it's out of plumb. It's not even close. You can eyeball this and see that it's not set up plumb and level like it should be. I'm also guessing, even though we can't see it here, they don't have any mud seals in place. They're probably set up on bare dirt and there's no mud seals. So if it rains a little bit, that's going to add to the instability of the scaffolding. And then, not related to the scaffold, but we have the silica dust that's being generated by the masonry saw. Silica is recently been one of the major issues focused on by OSHA, and they should focus on it. Silica, inhalation of microscopic silica particles can shorten a worker's life, can lead to different types of lung diseases. In some cases, could lead to acute illness and even acute death if there's enough of the dust that's inhaled. Just very poor housekeeping. We're going to talk about trip hazards in another unit, but this is a trip or a slip waiting to happen. Again, a lot of issues going on, and I'm going to speed this up here a little bit. We got inadequate guardrail on different levels. We've got frames that aren't fully decked. Remember, if our deck is 3 feet wide, the platform has to be 3 feet wide. Or if the frame is 3 feet wide, I should say, the platform has to be 3 feet wide. It's not fully decked all the way across the width of the platform. Here, and also here, it doesn't look like it's fully decked. They got a little bit of a guardrail here, but there's no toe board. We need a toe board for sure, because the setup here tells us there are workers below. They're using a hoist system to hoist material from a lower level to an upper level. We have this bucket that's being hoisted up. That means there's someone down here pulling the rope for the hoist and loading the bucket. So there's a potential for a dropped object to occur. And we have excessive cantilever here and not enough cantilever here. So multiple issues. Again, back to the OSHA thing. The fines for this job site, for just this part of the job site, could exceed $100,000. But more importantly, there's a potential for a worker injury, which can cost a lot more than the fines. A lot of issues here as well, a lot of housekeeping issues. But the main thing I want to point out here is a prohibited type of scaffold called a lean-to scaffold. They have structural supports leaning against the dirt embankment over here. The other end of those structural supports is in the rebar cage. Then they have a plank across the top of those structural supports. That is a lean-to scaffold, and it is specifically prohibited by OSHA. And it's not safe. There are safer ways of doing what these men are doing. Remove a little more dirt and put a real scaffold in there that they can work off of. And if the surface is proper, they could put a rolling mobile scaffold in. The wrong platform for the frame. Those hooks should fit over this tube, this piece of pipe. That's what those hooks are for. Earlier, the very first part of the first video, we talked about proper connections, a positive connection. I talked about hooks. Well, this is a type of hook that is used as a connector for scaffold systems. But it's the wrong length, it doesn't fit. That's a problem. Again, numerous problems. Look at what is supporting. This is a ladder, first of all. Ladders are not intended to be used as scaffold platforms. They're not structurally rated for this horizontal position like this. That's the first problem. Don't use a ladder as a platform. Then what they have supporting the ladder is at best iffy. I don't know that that's going to support a lot of weight for very long. I'd have to take a closer look at it. But I don't need to really see anymore. I need to take the superintendent to the side and say, hey, we need to work on this. We've got some issues here. We're going to get somebody hurt if we continue working like this. There's one thing that you may have caught on to already. That's really crazy. Well, his fall protection's bad. You may be thinking of that. He's unbuckled here. He's tied off. I can't really tell what he's tied off to. but he's tied off at his feet. But what's really kind of interesting here is the nail gun between his legs. Yeah, he might end up shooting himself in the family jewels if he were to slip or trip or fall, based upon where that nail gun is positioned. Harness not buckle, inadequate fall protection. The nail gun is all just nothing right about that. That's just wrong. And then the ladder and the structural integrity of what they're using as a scaffold platform is not good. A lot of masonry operations, bricklaying operations will look like this. We've got overloading scaffolding. We've got scaffolding that's not fully decked. Doesn't look like they've got some kind of mud seal in place there, but it's setting on bricks. Bricks are not designed to carry any kind of loading. Bricks can crumble under relatively light loads. And overloaded decking is a problem. Again, mud seals are questionable. They don't have any kind of leveling legs in place, and they do appear to be out of plumb and out of level. A number of the different scaffold sections that they have set up here. Too close to power lines. Every year there are workers killed when they're on a scaffold that's too close to power lines. They get electrocuted. Best practice, 10 feet clearance. The regulations do allow closer setup depending upon the amount of voltage carried by the power lines. But I'm always going to teach 10 feet. And most of the good companies that are out there, 10 feet. You don't get closer than 10 feet unless the lines have been de-energized. Multiple issues here. They do have a rolling mobile scaffold set up. That's pretty cool. But the rolling mobile scaffold is the casters are right on the edge, and the casters are not locked, and the casters are all caked in mud. There is a potential here for this scaffold to roll off of the edge and throw both of these men to the ground. Now, as far as fall protection, they're only 4 feet. Legally, they don't have to have it. But from a best practice standpoint, they should have. They should have a handrail in place, guardrail in place. Again, all kinds of trip hazards and debris just strewn all over the place, including on the deck where they're working. You need to keep your work platforms especially clean, because when you're up in the air, you don't want anything on your work platform that you're going to trip over and cause you to fall off of your platform. Yeah, and it's not fully decked. Yeah, mention the casters caked in mud. Here they are using a concrete block like this to keep their scaffolds from sinking into the mud. Great idea, I mean, on the surface, but concrete block like this do not have the compressive or the shear strength to support the load imposed by a scaffold and all of the weight that's put onto the scaffold. They made a good attempt, but you can't use masonry block for support, because masonry block is not generally going to be rated to carry any kind of loads. What they should have ideally would be leveling jacks and base plates, and attached to the base plates would be an actual 4x4 sill. And it wouldn't have to be constructed of 4x4s. That would be my preference. And here's what we mean by a leveling jack or a leveling leg. It's a screw jack, and you can adjust the level of your scaffold by adjusting the screws on the screw jack mechanisms. And this is the base plate, but it needs additional cribbing. These base plates are designed with the holes to be attached to additional cribbing. And my preference, and a lot of this goes to my work with cranes. With cranes, we don't use anything less than a 4x4. What we do, we put multiple 4x4s together edge to edge, then we sandwich those 4x4s between two sheets of 3/4 inch plywood. We screw it and glue it, and we put together a pretty substantial block of wood that would go underneath this base plate, and that's going to help prevent our legs from sinking into soft soil. Here we have a scaffold set up on a small barge. Not necessarily anything wrong with this. You can put a scaffold on a barge. This barge, though, I would say is a little bit small. Also, the scaffold itself doesn't appear to be set up correctly. If you do have a barge that you're using and you have a scaffold set up on a barge or a floating work platform, you need to make sure that the barge is large enough to provide the stability that's needed. We use barges in bridge construction, and we put cranes weighing 100 tons out on a barge. But those were big barges, and because of their size, because of their footprint, they were relatively stable. The larger your barge, the more stable it's going to be. The larger the footprint, the more stable it's going to be. Another issue that has to be considered here: if you have workers on a scaffold over water, you do not want them to tie off. If that scaffold goes into the water and they're tied off, they could drown. This happened, it's been 5 or 6 years ago in Texas, in Waco. Some workers were tied off. They were actually on an aerial lift. They were tied off to the handrail of the aerial lift. The aerial lift fell over into the water. They couldn't get free because they were tied off. Don't tie off over water, but do have personal flotation devices on your workers, PFDs. That would be required by OSHA. It's also just common sense. If you have workers over water, you need to protect them from the danger of drowning, which, again, that happens every year somewhere in the U.S. multiple times. This is not necessarily the wrong type of scaffold. This could work, but this is a scaffold that somebody just threw together. They needed a work platform. They threw it together. Their legs are not plumb. The cross bracing is sketchy. Everything's just kind of sketchy about it. Also, they don't have any kind of fall protection. And from this photo, and this is an awning over an entryway into a building. So let's say this is 10 feet from the ground right here. Add another 5 feet to that, the worker appears going to be 15 feet off the ground. They need fall protection. Also, they're using a folded step ladder, a folded A-frame ladder to gain access. Can't do that. Man, I know a lot of people do, and maybe I've even done it myself at home, but never at work. Not when I'm getting paid by someone else, because it's illegal. An A-frame step ladder, as we'll see in the ladder unit coming up, it has to be fully opened up with the spreader bars locked into position to be used legally. That's what they're designed for. This ladder folded up against the wall here, being used to climb up onto the platform, that's not proper access to that platform. Speaking of proper access to the work platform, again, multiple problems with this scaffold setup. There's decking problems, but the big problem that I really want to point out is that they're not providing a safe way for the worker to get to different levels in the scaffold system. He's just kind of doing a muscle up to pull himself up into that position. You got to have a ladder in place or a stair system. A lot of the more extensive scaffold systems, they will have stair towers that are constructed alongside the scaffold, and those stair towers make access easy and safe. Now, you might be thinking about this frame. Well, why couldn't they just climb this frame here? That frame is not considered safe access. That frame is not a ladder. It's not designed to be a ladder. But you'll see a lot of workers climb scaffold frames that look like this, thinking that that is a safe ladder. Now, there are scaffolds that have built-in ladder systems, but this isn't one of them. Again, must have a ladder or stair for changing levels unless the scaffold frame is designed for climbing, and this one is not. Fall protection, once he gets up here, he's a good, he's at least 15, 18 feet off the ground once he gets up there, and there's no handrail in place. He may be a lot higher. I can't see the lower part, what's down here. It looks like he may be a lot higher than 15, 18 feet off the ground. But 10 feet, you got to have fall protection. That's the OSHA regulation for scaffolds. But you should have fall protection anytime someone could fall and be injured. Oh boy. Housekeeping. They don't have the structure tied. They don't have the scaffold tied back to their structure. They did try to block off the ends of their work platforms. That's good. Give them a thumbs up for that. But just the overall structure, you can just eyeballing it see that it's not plumb and level. The bigger issue is the foundation for me. I would want to look. I would, first of all, if I saw this as a subcontractor on one of my projects, I'm going to politely shut them down. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to talk about all of the deficiencies and what we need to do moving forward to make it safe for everyone. I'm not going to mention OSHA once. I'm going to talk about, we need to make it safe for everybody on the job. Even though there are a lot of OSHA violations here, that's not going to be the gist of my meeting with the subcontractor. A lot of guys have probably done this. A lot of women have done this. You just step up on whatever's available. A job-built sawhorse. You need to reach up an extra 3 feet. There are work platforms, like we saw in a previous picture, that are much better, much safer options if you need to reach an extra 2 to 3 feet up. Now, one thing I do like about what they've done here, they did add leg extensions to the sawhorses to level everything up, and it looks like it's dead on level. But they don't have the correct platform for this setup. OSHA does allow the use of sawhorses as scaffold frames, but you need to have the right kind of platform. Fall protection is going to be an issue. Also, I'm going to be concerned about the legs sitting on this slippery sheet metal. It looks like these legs are down in those grooves, but these legs up here, this is a very slippery surface that they have this set up on. I need to rethink this, come up with a better plan. It can't put a ladder on top of a scaffold. Simple as that. This could be fun, as I indicate here. We have excessive cantilever with a worker standing on the cantilever portion. If this worker decides to climb down, hopefully they've got better communication and they wouldn't do that. But let's say they don't have good communication. This worker moves. He climbs down, or maybe he needs to climb up here on this beam. And for whatever reason, he removes his counterweight from this end of the platform. This guy's going to the ground because of that excessive cantilever. And multiple problems. No base plates. The decking's not even close to being right. This is just, hey, we need to get up here and do some welding. Let's see what's about. Let's throw something together. Lack of planning, which you'll see in the construction world, but also in general industry. Something needs to get done. Instead of taking your time and doing it properly, a lot of times this will happen. But we're there as safety professionals with our training that we provide, building the culture. We want to build a culture where this would not be viewed as acceptable. We want to build a culture where there's an emphasis on planning for safety. All right, and that's the last picture. In the next video, we're going to talk about powered aerial work platforms, boom lifts and scissor lifts specifically. We'll also talk about using man baskets with forklifts, which can be done. I don't like it, but it can be done. And it can be done safely, even though it's not a best practice.